Hello, everyone, and welcome to August's OpenNTF webinar. This is Domino Administration, Things Lurking You May Not Be Aware of, and How to Fix Them. Our agenda for today is I'll be going through our standard welcome slides, and then we'll have our presentation with Kim and Michelle. And then at the end, we'll have Q&A, and I'll go into the details of that in a bit. Before anything else, we definitely, and as always, would like to thank our OpenNTF sponsors. So HCL made a contribution to help our organization. It's the main thing that funds these webinars. This is, these are not free, and then this is what lets us do them. It also helps us fund events and community interaction on Discord. Again, not expensive, but not cheap or not free, and it just generally helps run the organization. So we try to keep things lean, but we do need this, and it has made everything we do possible. And then on the server side, Prominic has, for a very long time, donated all IT-related services. They do cloud hosting for us. They do infrastructure management of our Domino servers, and then also every other software as it comes up and as needed. And they do system administration for day-to-day operation, it's always very, very handy to be able to have somebody that you can ask to do stuff for you so you don't have to do it. And Prominic does that for us very, very kindly. And then I'd like to talk about OpenNTF in the community. So, I always kind of bang this drum and saying that, we are all OpenNTF. OpenNTF is not the board. OpenNTF is not just the people doing webinars. OpenNTF is all of us. It is the community that we are in. And we can all participate and learn from each other. We're all volunteers. No effort is too small. So sometimes it's running a webinar, sometimes it's writing code, sometimes it's writing snippets, but even just discussing things in chat is being part of the community. It is contributing, keeping things lively. Providing answers, even asking questions is itself useful and keeping things going. If you have an idea for something you'd like to make, we always welcome contributions. We always welcome new projects. And we also, again, are a community. And so there may be other people in the community that would like to help you make something. So if you have an idea of saying, oh, we really should have a project that does this, but I personally either don't know how to do all the parts or don't have the time, feel free to ask. You can also take an existing project and test it out. Add some documentation or modify it. Like you can say, okay, well, this has been, sitting there for a long time. The person left the community a long time ago and you'd like to pick it up. We welcome that. We've had a lot of projects like that. Or if it's just, one of many projects for somebody and, you can always offer to help pretty much all the time. That's going to be very welcome. You can write guides and documentation, if, like a blog post or actual outright documentation. I know for me, pretty much all of my projects are in desperate need of more documentation, and ideally one's not written by just me because I already know the stuff, and so I don't know what somebody who doesn't know needs to know. And then just little things like adding reviews and projects and stars on snippets. Just any of this stuff really helps, just like keeping the lifeblood going. That's what this is about, and that's the kind of thing that we want. So never feel like you're not equipped to be part of the community. You are part of the community, and any interaction is good. And speaking of which, you can join us on Discord. This imposing image is the QR code you can use. There'll be the actual URL later, which is openntf.org/Discord. This is a very pleasantly vibrant community. People are chatting all the time. We have different sections. So, we have a Domino admin, we have an XPages Java section, we have specific projects or connections and Docker and VoltaMX and all that. So there's a place to discuss all of this, and there are a lot of people there. A lot of the times we'll have we'll have project leads in there. We'll have people from HCL for the projects in there or the products in there. And it's a good time. So if you're not yet on Discord, I definitely recommend you join us there. We have a couple upcoming events. So next week we have our OpenNTF Hangout. This is about all topics. These were originally called repair cafes. What we want to say is really just there for whatever people want to talk about. Traditionally, there'll be a couple of people there. Admittedly, they're not super heavily attended, but that is actually good in some ways. Because we've had nice little conversations between just a couple people that go on about whatever somebody's working on or whatever somebody's thinking about. And they're meant to be structure free. And, if you're at your desk or it's the end of your day, if you're in Europe, then, we welcome you to just join in and see who's there, chat, and whatever topic it is. We've had some actually very good discussions in there. And then our upcoming webinars. Next month we have 2. So this is something we started last month. We have kind of a glut of topics that we would like to get through, and we don't want to have to make everybody wait until 2026 to get to them. So next month rather, we have a pair of 2. So one is about Domino containers, the next step from Martin, and then September 25th, we have Unleashing the Power of OTS, which is one-touch setup by Daniel. And so these are good separate topics. Whenever we've talked about containers in the past, kind of one-touch setup is in there too, because they just pair so well together, like peanut butter and jelly, but they are also separate. You don't need to use one-touch setup for your containers. You don't need to use containers for your one-touch setup. So I'm looking forward to these. I think it'll be good to kind of break some of this stuff down and explain like where you can use containerization for Domino and where you can use one-touch setup. And in both cases, my answer is all the time. But you'll find out specifically why and specifically what you can do. Now, before I hand this presentation over, I would like to talk a little bit about how we're going to do Q&A. So the first question, as always, will this be recorded? Yes, it is currently being recorded. They go up on YouTube, and so once it's there, we're going to process it, clean things up, get everything going. It'll be posted up on YouTube, and there'll be a notification in Discord when it's there. For other questions, you can use the questions pane in GoToWebinar. We will generally get to your questions at the end of the webinar. It's always up to the speaker's discretion if they want to watch that and then answer questions midway, but the general plan is to have them all at the end. And then we'll go through this and the speakers will respond to your questions verbally, so we won't necessarily write answers into the question pane. And as always, please keep all your questions related to the topics that our speakers are discussing. There's always the off-topic ones about something else, or like, when is HCL product whatever coming out? Again, we don't know, and that's not something that's part of this presentation. So it should be about specifically the sort of stuff that's going on. You are, however, free to ask those unrelated questions in Discord. So you can ask about when a product is coming out. You may not get an answer, but you are free to ask it there. That's one of the many things you can talk about in Discord. So for now, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Kim for Domino administration, things lurking you may not be aware of, and how to fix them.
Great. Thank you, Jesse. Okay. So welcome, and everyone. My name is Kim Greene. Myself and Michelle Smith are going to be presenting to you basically about topics that we have encountered at various customer environments over the years. Things that we thought the title was kind of fitting, things that are lurking. Domino is such a robust platform, and it just runs and hums along and performs well. It doesn't have any hiccups typically. So lots of times there are things that we're not even aware of. So we have to go and actually look for them, and we'll show you how to find them and how to fix them. So that's basically what this presentation is about. So a little bit of background about myself. I started my career many years ago at IBM. Back on the IBM, or the S400 then, now it's called the IBM I. I worked in the operating system development laboratory, and my focus was on performance. And in 1998, Lotus Domino became available on the IBM, on the S400 then, I guess, or maybe they called it I-Series. And I started working with it, and I absolutely loved it. So I left in 2000 and started my business, and basically the focus of my company is the HCL collaboration software portfolio, and we're basically right hands to our IT teams and companies around the world. So whether it's going in and digging into problems, whether it's upgrading servers or doing security reviews, performance reviews, health checks, or updating applications, whatever it happens to be, we are there to help our customers out. I also am an HCL ambassador and an IBM champion, and I will go ahead and turn it over to Michelle to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kim. I'm Michelle Smith. I'm also the owner of an IT consulting company. And a little bit about myself. I started fixing those IT issues during my university work terms. And that's when I learned I just love the puzzles that come with IT issues. And I love solving them. So my first exposure to Lotus Domino was actually migrating a non-Y2K compliant email system onto Domino as a compliance system. And that was, as you can imagine, prior to the year 2000. So that was a long, long time ago now. And my focus area is also the HCL collaboration portfolio. And I work with Kim to support our group of just wonderful clients. It's a joy. So our agenda today, we've grouped our lurking items into these different categories, and we're going to dig right into it now. So the first one, security. So your ACLs, your access control lists, are they really controlling access properly? You may think so, but when was the last time you actually checked this? And to ensure Domino databases are locked down appropriately, you're going to want to see which databases have things like default set to manager access, other domain servers manager access, anonymous manager access, and is the anonymous entry completely missing from the ACL? The thing about manager access, anonymous, default, and other domain servers as manager access, not a good idea at all. So check. You're going to be surprised how many databases this actually applies to, and even those HCL supply templates should be checked. This is an actual customer example, and the data we're seeing in this table is complements of the Wytria ACL Easy tool. Wytria is a business partner for HCL, and we use this tool set extensively. We're not trying to sell this tool set to you, but it's important to know which tools can help you in your day-to-day job, and we found these ones help us save a lot of time, and that translates into money saved for our customers. So this is a table that we've pulled from the data on a server, and some key things to see here, just as we talked about, there are a lot of entries where anonymous is manager, the default access is manager, and other domain servers are set to manager. So those are things you're going to want to take a look at, see if that really makes sense in your environment. And anonymous access. Should web users be able to view this database without authenticating? You're going to want to set anonymous to no access for all databases except those publicly facing databases. We've added a little screenshot here just to show you exactly what that should look like. And rember, without this, if your database is a mail file, you have calendar entries that are public entries, and if your server doesn't block anonymous access altogether, you may be granting people access through a web browser to your calendar and not expecting to. So in the case where anonymous is missing, some people don't know this, but if it's not present, any anonymous user, so anyone from a web browser accessing your server, is going to get the same access as default. So again, another customer example. We pulled this data, again using ACL Easy, and if you take a look, anonymous is missing on the App1 server on 855 databases. And as well, the default is set to, the default entry has manager access in 27 of those databases. So that's really something you're going to want to look at, and that's just the app server. I mean, we have dev servers, other mail servers. Those are things you're going to want to take a look at and see if it makes sense. Do you want anonymous? Do you want to set an anonymous entry there? Take a look and do that. Enforce a consistent ACL. So that's really, really key as well. This will allow you to make sure the ACL stays consistent across all different replicas of this database in your environment. And that protects databases if someone happens to pull the database from the file system level as well. So very, very key to have this set. This is something you're going to want in your environment. Access to your mail files. So who has manager or designer access? So it was common in the days before the out-of-office service came to be in an HCL Domino environment that out-of-office was an agent. And when out-of-office was an agent, people needed manager access to enable that agent. So we will see now in our environments that the user's access will still be manager access. And if they're manager access, it runs the risk they could actually even delete their own database from the server. So you don't want that to happen. And there's no need for them to have manager access. So the simple change would be to change that to editor access. Here's an example of ACLs being reviewed. So one of the things we do in our day-to-day work, we'll often do security reviews for people. And this is an example of some data that we pulled, and we wanted to show you exactly how to pull the data. So you can go into your Domino domain catalog, go to the access control list by name view, and you can see we've keyed in on a few entries, the default entry. So, and then underneath it, it's going to be a list of databases. Right now we have the view collapsed, but you're going to want to take a look at, what's under that manager level access. Who has default manager? Which databases have defaults set to manager, and take a look at that. And those are things you're probably going to want to change. And the same for anonymous. You can see there's at least one database that has manager access set to the anonymous entry. And so again, we're using this Wytria ACL Easy tool. And what's important to know here is that this is the same data. This is the same server we're looking at. It's just another way of looking at it. And we find with the ACL Easy tool, we can actually slice and dice this data a little better for what we're trying to to analyze the server. So here we've grouped it by the name of the entry and the access level. So this tool gives us the ability to do this, and we rely on it quite a bit. It's a really great tool to have. So same data gives you a little more granularity in looking at it. You're going to want to examine your agents. So one of the things you're going to want to do is analyze the signers of the agent. Again, you're going to be surprised what you find here for sure. You're going to want to cross-analyze this with the Domino server security settings. And is that signer even in the NAB? So you want to make sure your signers have the proper authority to run different agents on your server. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with those agents. And specifically, which servers are agents set to run on? That's another thing you're going to want to take a look at. Specifically on agent signers, you're going to see that over time, it's easy to lose track of the quantity of agent signers in your environment. And this is another real-world example. This is from an example from the OpenNTF servers. And this was before cleanup was done, again, using the Agent Easy product. And you'll see there are a number of different signers for the agents in this environment. So we've just collapsed this using the tool, looking over all the agents on the server, and lots of agent signers here. Another thing you're going to look at for agents is what server they're set to run on. As over time, you're going to create new servers, you're going to spin them up, you're going to replace servers, you're going to consolidate servers, and you're going to find an interesting mix in what servers your agents are set to run on. And this is another OpenNTF example. And we'll see that the first entry is saying these, the number in parentheses is actually telling you how many agents. It's just collapsed data. So we know 10 agents are set to run on any server. That may be exactly what you want, but then you can see a list. And I'm betting, well, some of these are obviously people, but I would be willing to bet that all those servers are not even in this environment. So another thing to look at and clean up. Here's a good one, the administration ECL. This functions as a template for your workstation ECLs. So we're all familiar with a notes client that'll pop up an ESA, an execution security alert now and then. It's telling you this operation is trying to be run. Do you approve this? And this is because the signer is not in your workstation's execution control list to be able to run that particular option. So you're always going to want to check default and no signature settings. Those are the key ones to hone in on at first. And you're going to find that also in this administration ECL, there's a lot of entries here that don't apply. For example, BT mail and calendaring migration tools. So that's that's not That's not a current signer you need in your environment, but there's also, we've obscured some of these entries, but we've seen fax servers in this. You just don't need that information in there in your admin ECL anymore. So to edit the ECL, you go into your Domino directory, and from the Actions menu, click on Edit Administration ECL. It's just that easy. It's kind of frighteningly easy sometimes, or you could actually edit it through your security settings document. And so, be warned. This be very careful when working with the admin ECL. We've seen instances where suddenly everybody in the environment is getting a security alert, and it's from a signature that's not a server, it's not an administrator, it's probably administrative user, but the users are not expecting that, and that's happened because the person looking at the admin ECL maybe just clicked OK when exiting, and suddenly that's signed with their user ID. So, so even just viewing the admin ECL can cause problems in your environment. So always, as a best practice, we always switch to a trusted ID that's already in the ECL to be able to, that is set so it is able to update other ECLs so users don't get that alert. Another thing to think about in your environment and protected groups. So there's this concept of being able to protect groups from accidental deletion. And you're going to want to secure those critical groups. This is configured in the directory profile in your Domino directory. And just as a little tip, you're going to have to edit this once and save it for it to become operational. So you get to that from the Actions Edit Directory Profile option. And this is meant for protection of, it'll prevent deletion of these groups. It has some very sensible defaults as a starting point, and that's local domain admins, local domain servers, and other domain servers. But you can also edit that and add other items. We had one client that had a system notifications group, and it was meant to hold every user in the environment, and they would send out a same time notice if the Domino server was, a different Domino server was going down. So they'd want to send a message to everyone, and they didn't ever want that deleted. So that they put that in this field, prevent deletion of these groups. So as so think about what you want to make sure nobody can delete. It's meant to, protect your Domino environment. Another thing to think about is examining and updating the HTTP password hash. So it's very common, we have found, to have non-secure HTTP password hashes in use. And it's pretty simple to upgrade that HTTP password hash to a more secure option as well. So this is a two-step process. The first step is to edit your directory profile. And again, in your Domino directory, you go to Actions, Edit Directory Profile. And we have a screenshot here at the bottom. It's saying, do you want to use secure internet passwords? There's actually a no option. There's a yes option with a lower release of Domino. So you're going to want to pick the one right now, I believe. I don't believe there's a newer one, but so it's the one with the 801 in it. So that's the most secure one available now. And then step 2, you're going to upgrade your person documents. So you've set it system-wide for any future changes. You also want to update your existing person documents. So you do that. The HCL has made available an action for you. Sorry. That's okay. And this just shows here how to actually apply the action. Yes, the web administration database. This one has been deprecated, but we've seen it lurking around in many customer sites. So the support for this one was actually withdrawn by HCL due to the cross-site request forgery attack vulnerability that it was in the code. So webadmin.nsf is the intention is to allow administrators to administer Domino via a browser rather than the Domino admin client. The recommendation we have is to remove both the database and the template from the server. You don't need those. And there's also an INI variable that you can set. So we often set both, we set that variable and we delete the database and template, both things, just to make sure the environment is completely clean and that database can't, for some reason, come back. So if the template's left around and you don't have the INI variable set, HTTP on a restart will recreate that webadmin.nsf database, at least on earlier versions. That may be changed now. And if you're using webadmin.nsf, just make sure that you're going to want to set that anonymous entry to no access. Now I'm going to hand it over to Kim for performance.
Great, thanks, Michelle. So performance, since I started my career at IBM working on performance, is near and dear to my heart. So whenever I get an opportunity to work on a performance issue, I'm like, ooh, this is great. So I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the things that we've seen in different customer environments. The first one, we're really used to looking at, from a performance perspective, we know to look at our Domino statistics. So I'm not going to cover that in this session because we're talking about things that are lurking. What I am going to talk about is I'm going to give you an example here, how critical it is to actually look at the underlying hosting server or virtual machine for that Domino server. And this happens to be an IBM I example. And here we can see that we had a lot of paging and faulting. And paging and faulting means that the Domino performance is going to be impacted. It was quite bad. The faulting on this specific server should have been 100 faults per second or less. And you can see we're in the 300 to 500 range, or up to 600 at times. So not optimal at all. We drilled down and we could see that the bulk of almost all the faulting was happening in the Domino servers. The memory pools where the Domino server is running. So it's okay. This tells us that we need to actually reallocate memory. So we did some memory reallocation and we added additional memory to the host. And it was pretty dramatic. So we added memory, and you can see this is CPU utilization. So you can actually see the date that we added the memory. So CPU was basically had been double what it was when we had optimal memory. So you can see a very dramatic reduction in your CPU on your server by making sure the Domino server has optimal memory. So it's really important to take a look at the underlying operating system. This is a memory example, but certainly you want to look at your CPU, your disk, everything else associated with that hosting server to make sure your Domino servers are performing optimally. Another thing to do is to look at your network performance. This is very, very critical. Notes clients are they can be very heavily impacted if there's a lot of network noise going on. And the way that you find this out is you're going to run traces and find out what your packet loss is. And the sweet spot is 4% or less for packet loss. If you have anything 4% or higher, then your notes client is going to be impacted. So it's going to appear to the end users that the server's slow, applications are slow, but it's really actually a network performance issue. Pretty simple to do. You can just do a ping with a large packet size. So here we have an example. We're doing the ping 100 times, and our packet size we're sending is 8,192 bytes. You can specify the server name, the fully qualified internet host name, the IP address, however you want to specify that. And this is an actual real life customer example from just a couple of weeks ago. Here we actually had 21% data loss. So this was something that was really valuable for the network team then to go back and say, hey, oh wow, we're losing packets. We need to delve into that. So we know it's not an issue with the Domino server itself. We know it's not an issue with the application. It's something that's happening on the network. So again, these are things that can kind of sneak in. It happens over time. So something to look at. Another thing is your views. We know especially as application developers, they get torn in lots of directions from the users. I want to be able to see this. I want to be able to see that. I want to be able to sort it in every way possible. So if this is what your application looks like, where you have many, many, many columns in a view and they're all sortable, this can be a really heavy demand on the server. And you're going to see your update CPU utilization go up quite high. So it's really key to look at which columns really absolutely need to be sortable for the end users and using the application. So that's one I'm going to look at. Another thing that you can do to have your applications perform better is actually have hidden views that they use. So then the application can go and do a lookup against a single column and get the data that it needs. And what's nice about this is a hidden view. End users are not using it. So then you're going to have better application performance. That view is not being updated all the time because users aren't looking at it. So less demand on the update task to keep that view up to date. And this, where feasible, go ahead and look at your views and how often is the view refreshed. If you can, set it to manual, not feasible, again, all times, but really look at what your view refresh rate is for views and have those be only as aggressive as absolutely needed. And again, that's going to help with your overall performance, and you're going to see the CPU utilization of the update task or tasks is going to be decreased. The other thing you want to do is check your size of your inbox. I'm guilty of this, I have to admit. I'm kind of a pack rat. I do like to file lots of things, but my inbox is larger than it probably should be. But the size of the inbox can have quite an impact on CPU and also end user response times. So this is data that has been collected, and you can see that on a small mail file, it doesn't really matter if you have 1,000 or 4,000 documents in the inbox. Performance of the CPU utilization is about the same. But you get to a larger mail file, 700 meg, which really nowadays isn't even that large of a mail file. And you can see that when you quadruple the number of documents, you're doubling the CPU consumption. So when you have really large inboxes, that can have quite a demand on the servers from a CPU perspective. And certainly then you're going to need more memory to handle those indexes as well, with all the folders, the inbox folder. And it also impacts the end user response time. So again, looking at the same data, you can see if you have a small mail file, it doesn't really matter if you quadruple the number of documents. Your end user response time stays fairly low. But if you have a very large inbox, your end user response time is going to be quite high. So how do you actually discover like what the size of the inbox even is? You can actually go into Logdown NSF and go to the usage by size view. And there'll be a document for every single database on the server. When you open up the document, then you can see the size of every single view and folder in that specific database. So that's how you could find the information out. What can work really well to control the size of the inbox is, well, certainly archiving or setting quota limits can help, but just enabling the inbox maintenance. I think this is introduced into release 9. You can set it up here in the server document. So if you go to server tasks, the administration process tab, you can specify what your criteria is as far as how many days the documents can be in the inbox before they're removed. Or you can say, I want to have it based on policies. And then you would just create a policy, a mail settings document. Then you would specify on the mail basics tab, specify your criteria. It's not deleting the documents from the database, it just removes them from the inbox. So the user can still find them in the all documents view. And our next topic now is full text index health. So this is something that we see gets overlooked quite often. Have you done any full text index tuning? And typically, probably not. Unless you've run into problems. By default, both full text index operations and view index operations are handled by the same thread. So you can end up with a lot of contention, and we've seen lots of semaphore contention issues, and I'll show you one on the next slide. What you can do to prevent that situation is it's very simple. Just set the update full text thread equal 1 variable, restart your server, and then any full text index operations are going to be spawned off to its own thread, and that's going to help tremendously. So how do you know if this is applicable in your environment? Well, these are the key statistics you want to look at. So we can see our full text index count, our index search, and then the total search results. So you can see we have quite a lot of full text indexing happening on the server. So certainly a good idea to get that variable set so we can spawn that full text indexing off to its own thread. So this is a customer example we had where the customer said, hey, we've got performance issues, and I started looking into the situation. I could see lots of semaphore timeouts, and 793 is actually quite high, especially for an HTTP agent. And you can see that there's full text semaphores as well. There's 20. So that's actually not a healthy server. And what I did is as I dug into this, I found that they actually had a web-based agent that was doing full text indexing operations. So what we ended up doing is we went ahead and just enabled that variable so that full text indexing was spun off to its own thread, and all the semaphore timeouts went away. So something to, again, these are things that can be lurking. These are ways to also prevent them. And are you actually doing anything preventively with your full text indexes? Are you running updal-x? And typically the answer is going to be no. It's typically when updal-x, when people do run it, they usually run it to fix a corrupted full text index. So it can remedy full text index corruption. But what's really important is that it also reduces the size. So here's an example. This is a fairly recent example with a customer. They had a database, had 77,000 documents. This whole size of the database is 1.5 gig. So not a huge database. And you can see that the full text index was about 4 gig in size. We ran updal-x, and it reduced that full text index down to 1.8 gig. So that's a very substantial decrease. This is just one application. If you take all your applications that are full text indexed, all your mail files that are full text indexed, if you're not running updal-x on a regular basis, you can have some pretty unwieldy sizes of your full text indexes. So recommend running that on a periodic basis. So now let's move into traveler health and look at some items there. So how many of you do tell traveler status on a regular basis? And let's be honest, right? We do it occasionally. To be honest, most people do it when they notice there's a problem. And if we do it more periodically, we can actually prevent problems from happening. Certainly, we like to see a green status because it says, hey, there aren't any issues. Yellow says there's something that really, is not right, should be investigated, but it's not going to cause immediate issues. And then red certainly is something critical that needs to be addressed immediately. So just take a look at an example. What's great about it is that when it is yellow or red, it gives you the reasons. So we can see that this server has been up since May 2nd. 98%, or basically its availability index is 98, so that actually looks really good. But we can see that the problem is that the peak number of HTTP connections is 515% of the available 437 threads. So there are not enough HTTP threads to handle the peak workloads that are happening on the server. So we need to go ahead and address that. So another thing we want to look at for traveler performance is the traveler memory allocations. And just tell traveler mem, we'll give you the statistics. And it's not usually a problem, but it can be. So again, something that could be lurking and causing issues. Highly recommend doing this on a periodic basis. And what the only area you typically need to adjust would be the Java memory. Here we can see we have a really good allocation. We have 2 gig allocated, and we're only using 1.2 gig, so things are looking good. But this is a key statistic to look at, again, on a somewhat regular basis, just to make sure things are healthy there. So it's really easy for us to check things and forget. So going back to the example we had, right? We had a yellow status, or we didn't have enough HTTP threads. We set it, but users have so many devices, and unless you actually have a very actively managing that and approving the number of devices, it's pretty easy for that to get out of control. Not out of control, but I should say for the number of devices to increase quite a lot. And whether you have the non-high availability, basically the Derby database and the NSF, or you're using the high availability implementation, it doesn't matter. The best practice is that you want 1.2 times the number of devices to be the number of your HTTP threads. So that's your guideline. Some of the other things you can do is you can actually do tell traveler stat show, and you can get your statistics. And one key one is to look at the get thread delay time. You want the majority of those to be in the 0 to 2 second range. If it's above that, you're starting to get into that situation where you may not have enough HTTP threads. And you also want to monitor for the 503 server busy error, because that's indicating that there are not enough threads to handle all the work that the traveler server has coming at it. So don't forget about it. Don't set it once and forget about it. It's easy for us to do that. But at the same time, don't go hog wild. So we want to make sure we have an adequate number of threads. We have had customers that have said, I don't want to have to manage it. I'm just going to set it, and I'll set it to a very, very high number, and then have performance issues. And the reason they have performance issues is now the server has to manage all of those HTTP threads. And that's not just CPU that's being used, but it is taking up quite a lot of memory. I mean, I have the statistics here to show you how much memory is for a 32-bit system, which I can't imagine anybody's using anymore. We're all using 64-bit, but 4 meg per thread is quite a lot of memory when you have many thousands of threads potentially. So that's something to keep in mind when you're setting the number of threads on your Traveler server. The other thing you want to do on a regular basis is to defragment the Traveler database, whether it happens to be the Derby database or the underlying relational database. You want to defrag that. There's a utility built right into Traveler called dbmaint, and you can set your interval. If you have a high availability database, so you've converted it to HA, then you can also set the time in the day. Those options are not available if you're using the non-HA, just use the Derby database. And once you have those set, you're going to want to go ahead and just set the auto on. So then it's just going to run we recommend every 7 days. We find that tends to work very well for most customers. Certainly monitor your environment, see what's happening. When it does a defrag, it's going to tell you how much space it recovered, so you can get a good idea if you look at the output of that to see is this running at the right interval on my servers. And I should mention, you do not have to use dbmaint if you have switched to the HA version, if you've converted to HA, and you have DBAs on the back end that are doing that management of the databases. So this is optional for HA environments if the DBAs are doing the maintenance on the back end. Okay, can you wipe the device? So in the most common situation is someone lost their device or was stolen. It also can happen if someone's terminated or someone is resigned or let go of the company. You want to make sure that you have in your server document in those Traveler tab that you have the user managed security set to enabled. If you don't have that enabled, there won't be the ability to do the wipe on the device unless you have an external MDM, certainly. So this is something to go ahead and set to make sure you have that ability when you need it, because when you need it you have to have it. Next topic we're going to talk about is database health. First topic we'll talk about in here is deletion stubs. So deletion stubs are something when you delete a document, Domino creates a stub. That way it has a way to basically track the full life cycle of that document. So if it's deleted in one replica, if that change gets replicated over to another database, that document gets deleted over there. And we have to make sure that those get purged on a regular interval so that we don't have too many deletion stubs. Where this tends to be a problem is typically in custom applications is where I see this, and it's when Domino data is populated on a regular basis from a back-end environment. And lots of times all the documents are deleted out on a nightly basis, and they have an agent run to basically re-pull information from the external system, whether it's DB2 or SQL Server or whether back-end ERP environment you're pulling it from. And then you can get into a situation where you literally can have millions of deletion stubs. And you might think, well, why is that a big deal? Well, anytime you're actually doing any searches on that database, those deletion stubs are included. Now, the user doesn't see them, but that can really be a drag on the application performance. So what you can do is you can just do show database in the database name, and it'll tell you the number of live documents, the number of deleted documents. And you can use DBMT to purge those regularly, just or open the database in the Nose client. Just make sure you have your purge intervals set to have that so that you don't have quite so many deleted, so many deletion stubs in the database. You also want to monitor the size of your logging databases. This is really, really critical. We've seen lots of performance issues where we have semaphore timeouts, or even worse, we have long-held locks happening. And this happens with your log.nsf, your dom.log.nsf, or any of your custom logging databases that you have your applications, for example, your agent log data, it goes into a separate logging database. So we recommend keeping the size of those small, purge out those old documents or archive them, get them out of there. It's pretty simple to do. If you don't have an archiving agent, you can just go into Space Savers and make sure you put a check mark next to remove documents, and then specify how many days is appropriate for your environment. But make sure you do that on not just log and downlog, but any of those custom log databases. Again, we've seen long-head locks on custom logging databases that end up hanging the server and crashing the server. We've seen the same thing with log.nsf and downlog, so very important to keep an eye on those. So server corruption can happen, or should say corruption of your databases and then associated NLO files if you're using Deos. And so what can you do to proactively manage those? We do occasionally have server crashes. Luckily, Domino is very stable and very solid. It's not very common. But one of the things you can do to proactively manage, if you're not in a clustered environment, you can use something called DB Capture tool. And what this will do is it will take a database that it determines, that the server determines is corrupted. It will give it an extension of .cor, and it moves it to the IBM Technical Support folder. Well, why is this important? I had a customer call me, it was probably about 7 years ago, and their Domino server was running on a Windows environment, and it was on a Saturday. And I thought, oh, getting a call from this customer on a Saturday, I better answer. And what I found out is they said the server's crashing repeatedly, can you help us out? So I connected in and found out what the problem was. They had a database that was corrupted, and the server just was tripping up on this database constantly. So we moved the database out of the server data directory, started the server, everything was fine. And then we implemented a DB Capture tool so that in the future, if that situation happened, the server would not crash. This would basically, it would just move it to the IBM Technical Support folder. Easy to enable. There's a null cyanide variable to enable it. If you're using cluster symmetry, there's a repair utility, which is fantastic. And what repair will do is it will try to first to run fix-up against the database that it detects it's corrupt and has issues. If it's unable to repair it with fix-up, then what it does is it looks for a good replica, and it does a rename of the file. So you see the file format here, where it has the month, basically a timestamp on the end of it, so you know exactly when it happened. You're going to want to make sure that you have the auto repair and the RPR cleanup tasks. They're set in your server tasks variable for this to function well. And then if you're running, I think it's 1101 or earlier, it's called repair cleanup. So the name of the task changed a little bit. And then we do also recommend that you have program documents to run the database cleanup on a regular basis and also run repair on a regular basis. So those are some best practices to keep your environments clean. So what are you doing with Compact? We were told for many, many years that your option, you should be running Compact with the lowercase b or uppercase b. So whether you want to recover space or just recover the unused, reduce the file size or just recover the unused space. Well, the most recent recommendation, actually for quite a while now, is to use DBMT. And in essence, what DBMT is doing is a copy style compact. So if you're not using DBMT, you really should be switching your compacts to use compact-c. And this is really equivalent to doing a defrag on whether it's on your Windows server or on a relational database. It's going to reorganize the file and it's going to keep it much cleaner. If you have been doing compact-c within multi-threaded environment, you no longer need to have this null cyanide variable set that was only applicable in version 8.5.1 or 8.5 in order to get the multi-threading function to work for you. And that takes us to schedules. Let me go ahead and turn it back to Michelle.
Okay, thanks. So don't forget, you're going to want to know your schedules. Have you examined your program document schedules in relation to the backups or any other things working on your server? It could be agents, compacts, another external process. You're going to want to know your schedule. And what is in your scheduled program documents? Are scheduled tasks ending before the others are kicking off? So if for example, at night you run fix-up compact updall on a key database, you're going to want to make sure that the compact doesn't start until the fix-up ends. So that's something you could, every now and then take a look at your console logs, make sure that one's ending before the other starts. Consistently on a day-to-day basis, you may need to adjust a little bit. We found in some of the client sites we worked in, it's set up, people have forgotten about it, and then suddenly it's taking a little longer, so it's overlapping. Should schedules be adjusted to accommodate backup and agent schedules? So you don't want compact running in the middle of your backups. For example, you want get your compacts done first, and you're backing up nice clean data. Do scheduled tasks conflict with one another? So just make sure things are not overlapping. And what are in your server tasks at various times set to in your node CNI? You want to make sure you're kind of making sure that not everything's running at a certain hour. Make sure it's kind of set good intervals through the night that make sense for you. And so how do you know your schedules? You could do this, and I always have trouble saying this, but show sched command. And this is going to list all the scheduled tasks on your server. So we've obscured some of the server names here because this is actually a real environment. And you can see at the bottom of the list, compact is set to run in a program document, and it's set to start at 9:30. So that'd be 9:30 p.m. for this particular one. Or no, that's 9:30 in the morning. I see that's 24-hour clock. And the event monitor is going to run at 14:14 the next time. So, that's good information to have and easily at your fingertips. Another way you're going to want to see when your agents are running. So now you can do a tell agent manager sched. And this is going to list your agent schedules. And, there's limited granularity here if you take a look at this. And we have another example of using our agent easy tool against that same data, against that same server. And it gives us more granularity. And this allows us to kind of slice and dice the information a little in a cleaner format to really, really kind of show exactly what we want to hone in on perhaps and see what's running when. Okay, so now on to crashes. So are you using the automatic diagnostic collection? You can use this to collect crash reports and run the fault analyzer. So something to be aware of. This is not the fault analyze process. This is not enabled by default. So you're going to want to go into your configuration document to your diagnostics tab. This will imply you set up your mail-in database first, and then you'll be able to, on that first line of the screen capture, choose your mail-in database. Gives you some settings to change in the emails that go out, just so you're not sending something too large via email. And it actually gives you the ability to add files from the standard set of files that are being collected in this process. So in this example, we are getting some memcheck logs and some logazio logs as well. So that's customizable. You can gather more information if you want to. And just a reminder, at the very bottom, you're going to want to set fault analyzer to yes. And fault analyzer is a process that will run on the mail-in database. This server actually has it set to run on all mail-in databases, which may be overkill. This will allow you to actually select the mail-in databases you want to run it on. And you're only going to want to run it on those fault collection mail-in databases. And once, the purpose of that is that, it's going to review the information that is maybe not so easy to read and reformat it so it's a little more consumable for you, and perhaps even at a glance it'll give you some hints, see what's going wrong with the server when it crashed. Something else to think about, there's crash notification roll up. So this is actually for on the client side. You can set this in a desktop policy and you can collect those fault reports. And we've shown you here the screenshot of the desktop settings document. It's on the diagnostics tab. Key items, you're going to have to set, what's the mail-in database it's going to be set to. And we would recommend not prompting the user. You want this to run silently because, if a user's notes client just crashed on startup, if they're asked a question, they may not be so, a user can click no to that. So why prompt them? You want this information. And next slide. So auto restart after failure. Do your servers have enough time to properly shut down? So some servers actually need longer than the default 300 seconds to shut down. If you're used to managing a same-time server, you'll see it takes a while to shut down a lot of the tasks, or it certainly did in previous versions. And we found that 300 seconds was just not enough for it to shut down. So you're going to want to adjust that based on your environment. See, take a look at your console logs. Make sure by the time your server is supposedly down, you see those last messages of the server's exited, and you're on the right path. You want to set that timeout properly for your environment. And are you getting notifications when the crashes occur? So, I mean, Domino is resilient, well, resilient even on a crash. It can crash, come right back up. People may not even notice, especially if it's happening at night. And, you know, what better way than to send you an email when the server comes back up and let you know that the server has restarted. And another thing to think about, you can actually, set who it's going to. And we like to say, perhaps don't put your boss on that list. You'll want to find out before them. Certainly let your boss know when things are happening, but you don't want them to know before you. And now for notes INI. So in a server, review your server tasks. Or you're going to want to find out if the critical tasks are running. And sometimes you're going to want to check. We actually ran into this with a particular customer. People were calling in and they were reporting that views were not getting updated. We found that the update task for some reason was not running. It was not in the notes INI to start up when the server started. And don't forget, not all servers need all tasks. Often when a server is set up, you'll get a lot of tasks in the notes INI that are starting. And if you're new to an environment, you may want to take a look and check, because we've seen instances where LDAP's running on many, many servers. Doesn't need to be running on all of them. It's never used, but it's just a task taking up memory and waiting and listening and hopefully not responding to anything if you don't expect it to be set on that server. But that's one thing to look at. Decks we see still being started, and that's not really something that we see used in environments specifically anymore. And all the calendaring functions as well. Often they're set up, but they're not being used perhaps on an application server. And don't forget to take a look and determine, is R&R Manager needed? Do you need the rooms and resources task running on a server? No, its function is to process all those rooms and resource activities when you're inviting rooms to a meeting, handle cancellations and update busy time and cluster busy. If it's used, has that design been updated? It's easily missed, and we see it quite often in environments where the server's been updated to a new release, but the resource reservations database has not been updated. And old debug still lurking. We find this a lot. It's so easy to set debug, troubleshoot a problem, and forget to come clean up the debug later. So is there a lurking debug still enabled? I would recommend checking on this one. And the thing about all this extra debug, if it's not needed, it can take up, well, first of all, it clutters up your log.nsf in your console so much. It's sometimes hard to read what you really want to. It just puts so much white noise in something that you can't see the information you're looking for. And these are actually variables we found in real customer environments. And LDAP debug equals 3 at the very bottom of the list. This is something we see often in environments if they've done any SMTP mail routing troubleshooting, and then the issue's fixed, but that's still set. It's not something you'd want to keep set all the time on your server. And talking about the notes INI, don't forget a lot of these parameters can be set in your configuration document. So if you find, so this may be something you want to clean up as well. And we've noticed there are some environments where we take something out of the notes INI, clean it up, restart the server, and the variable is set again. And we find it in the configuration document, because that's another way of setting a notes INI variable. And don't forget to review for those unsupported variables, those items that were deprecated. And HCL has published a list. I would call it's certainly a partial list. It's a great start to kind of go through. If you're doing an upgrade, it's good to know which variables that are in your notes INI that may not be needed anymore. Might as well clean those out. And we've listed a few examples here. And just a note on that percent avail system resources. That's not listed in the KB article, certainly has been deprecated, and it's one of those things that we'd see, often in earlier releases, but so it's, something to be aware of. That's one of those ones that could be cleaned out. And do you have these variables set? So we recommend certain variables that are very non-impactful as far as a performance point of view, and they having these set will let you gather information in a proactive manner that could be key to solving an issue, especially with semaphore issues. And the debug ones, the three in the bottom, are specifically for semaphore issues, and having the thread ID in your console log, the last option, very, very helpful when trying to debug issues we found. And then I'm circling back to the first two, those console logs. Make sure your console logs are set to a size that makes sense for your environment. Often we see this set to 10 megabytes. And because that console wraps, you could be losing valuable information. So those are things to set now, ahead of time before you have an issue, because you can't go back and gather that information once the issue happens. So prevent updates to the server tasks at line. This was one of those things when I think it was actually Kim brought this to my attention years and years ago. And it was one of those aha moments because, so are you tired of losing your server tasks at customizations? You've gone through and you've taken out all those customizations, the tasks that you don't need, you upgrade your server and, they're back. And so you can actually stop those from coming back, so those from being altered when your server is upgraded. And you would set this setup leave server tasks equals 1 in your notes INI, restart your server once, and then when you do your upgrade, it's going to prevent that automatic updating when the server is upgraded. Don't forget to ensure the proper event pool size is set. This is especially important if you're actively debugging a problem. And an indicator that this is not set high enough, you'll see we detailed the exact message you'll see in the logs. And this can be, I believe the default is set to 10 megabytes, but it can be set up to 100. And we've given you the notes INI variable you can set to increase that if you're running into that error, and it does require a server restart as well. Okay, I'm going to send it over to Kim for clusters and failover.
Thanks, Michelle. So clusters and failover is something that most customers deal with nowadays. It's very rare for a customer to not have a clustered environment because of the demands of having 24/7 access and 365 days a year. So there isn't any tolerance really anymore for most businesses around the world to not have clustering. So it's a topic that we definitely wanted to cover. So from a failover perspective, one of the things that you want to make sure is set for your end users is to have that failover happen silently. You don't want to have them prompted and notified that, hey, you're failing over, because then they're going to call the help desk. What's happened? What's going on? You want it to happen silently. So very simple. In your desktop settings document on the Mail tab, to just make sure that the enable silent failover when server goes down is enabled. It should be by default, but we've found a number of environments where it's not. Again, lots of things that are lurking that can really trip you up. Another one is for your mail routing. Your mail routing is normally the Domino server gets mail. It's going to say, hey, what is the user's home server? I'm going to route the mail to that server, and then the user gets their mail. Well, if their server is down, what happens? Well, then the mail has to get routed through in a different way. And what you want to do is you want to make sure it's enabled for last hop only. And what that will do is it allows the server, wherever the mail came in from, to look and say, okay, here's the user's home server. Well, that home server is not available. What other servers are on the cluster that the user is connected to? And then it can actually route the mail to the server. So just make sure, again, you're just having seamless mail flow to your end users. This is one, directory assistance failover. This is one I've seen trip up many customers. It's really common for most customers to have an application link. When you think about it, what an application link is that when you create it, you open a database and you go and you do file and you create an application link. Well, that's a link to a specific database on a specific server. So when that server goes down, you're out of luck. There isn't any way that your directory assistance is going to work. So what you want to do is you want to delete that. You don't want the application link at all. Instead, what you want to do is you want to go down and you want to specify the server name. You want to put asterisk. So it's just going to basically be any servers in your cluster that have the directory assistance database, the name of your, wherever the file and the path is to your directory assistance database, make sure it's enabled. And then when a failover happens, it'll be seamless. And we have also seen it where this is set up, where it's set up to the server's asterisk, and then the directory assistance database is listed, but the application link is also set. And what we've found is the application link is the king. So if you have the application link set, it doesn't matter if you have the bottom portion filled out. It's going to try to go to whatever server the application link was created from. So make sure you do delete that, and then just specify what we have here in the screen capture in the bottom portion. So resource reservation manager, we know, is very key. If you're doing any scheduling of any resources in your environment, whether it's rooms or projectors or whatever it happens to be, very critical to have functioning in your Domino environment. And when it's a clustered environment, it's only going to run on one server. And that server is going to be whatever is considered the home server for the R&R manager. And that's determined in the ACL. So the ACL you're going to have is where you're going to have the administration server set. That's where R&R manager is going to run by default. So when we actually have a failover, our primary server goes down, the home server goes down, and then what ends up happening is R&R manager gets failed over to the secondary server. And what it will do is when the primary server finally comes back up, then R&R manager doesn't automatically move back because it doesn't know, it's no longer the owner of the R&R process. The secondary is, and it doesn't know what all the transactions that necessarily happened, who reserved a new room, who did a reschedule, who did a cancel, or a terminate, deleted a need for a resource. So what you end up having to do is you actually need to take that secondary server down, and you need to leave it down. We found the sweet spot is about 30 minutes. And after that time, then R&R manager will actually switch back to your primary server. You can use the really handy command, tell R&R manager who owns and the name of your resource database, and it'll tell you which server is the owner. And we see this forgotten in, I would say, 99% of our customers. When they do a failover, it works, right? Domino, it works. That's why we have this presentation on lurking things. And R&R manager, if they've had any kind of a failover, it's almost always on that secondary. They don't know to look. Customers don't think about it. Again, it functions just fine, but you want to really move that back to your primary. So this is the trick to go ahead and do that. Cluster symmetry is something that was introduced into Domino Release 10, and it's fantastic. It works extremely well. It does have some limitations and some things you need to be aware of to make sure it's set up optimally in your environment. We had a customer, this was probably about 2 years ago, they came to us and they said, we can see that the ID vault is replicated over to our secondary server, but we can't manage it from the secondary server. So we went ahead and we dug into the problem, and we found out that the way that the ID vault had gotten put on the secondary server was through cluster symmetry. Cluster symmetry said, hey, this ID vault, IBM ID vault directory is included. I don't see the ID vault over on the secondary server. Sure enough, it did its job. It did exactly what it was expected to do. It went ahead and found a good replica and it moved it to file system level, moved it over there. But now you have an issue because your ID vault function is not going to work. And it ended up turning out to be quite a process because you can't just delete it and have it think it's deleted. So we had to do a lot of work in order to get ID vault to function so it could run on the secondary server. So it's highly recommended. Do not include your IBM ID Vault directory, and we also recommend do not include the empty data directory. And you'll have to determine in your environment if there are any other directories that should not be included. So don't go just with the default of all folders. Make sure that these two are excluded. And does ID vault do does cluster symmetry do exactly what you expect it to? And sometimes we find that customers don't fully understand it, and it's doing a copy of the file system level. So if you have a situation where you have DEOS enabled on one server and not enabled on another, this is not going to work. And if they have it very well outlined in the documentation that the servers have to be set up the same, but when you think about it, it's copying in the file system level. So if you are copying from a server that has DEOS enabled to a server that does not have DEOS enabled, you're going to be missing attachments. Some other things that we found customers struggle with this is they don't understand that it doesn't do with anything in the data directory. Again, this is documented, it's just not well understood in our practical application working with customers. So if you have applications that you need to have cluster symmetry working on, you're going to have to move them out of the data directory, move them into a folder underneath the data directory. And another limitation is it doesn't work with templates. So it doesn't matter if those templates are in a folder underneath the data directory, their templates are not included. So there may be additional checking you need to do on your servers to make sure you're not missing replicas, even if you have cluster symmetry enabled. And then the other gotcha is the case sensitivity. So all the folder names and file names have to match exactly. So you can't have a slightly different case in any of them. They won't actually be able to, cluster symmetry will not be able to help you in that case. So now let's go ahead and move into replication, because we have to be able to replicate in order for our clusters to work properly. And one of the key things is making sure that you're not missing replicas. For your mail files, it's pretty simple. You can just create a registration policy, which I can't say I've ever seen a customer that doesn't have a registration policy, but make sure that you have specified the option that all mail server cluster mates is where all your mail replicas files are going to be created. And that tends to fix that issue. Doesn't help with applications, but for your mail files, it works great. So some things to be really careful of. Quotas and perk do not replicate, and it's slightly different depending on which one it is. So with quotas, if you have a quota specified on a database and you create a new replica on a clustered server, that quota setting replicates over. But when you change the quota on your primary, that does not replicate over. And we've seen many customers have issues with they're not having all the documents in the secondary servers, and it's because their quotas are not set properly. So if you change the quotas on the primary server, you have to go and change the quotas on all of the cluster mates. Or the other thing we found is another trick is just remove the quotas on the secondary servers. The users are accessing the mail files on the primary. That's where the quota is enforced. It's only when you're in failover situations, typically you go to secondaries unless you're doing load balancing. Then you can just remove the quotas on the secondaries and you can fix that issue. So perk is the other one. So this is something that was introduced into version 8.5, I think it was 8.5.2 maybe. Purge interval replication control. And what this does is it prevents a situation where you have old documents come back. I don't know anybody that's done administration for any number of years that hasn't run into this, whether it's in names.nsf or there's old admin P requests that come back. It's typically names.nsf that you see the problem. But you can prevent that by enabling perk. And you can just set it at the database property level, shown here in the screen capture, or you can just run the compact command with -perk on. That goes ahead and sets it. But what's really key to remember is this setting will not replicate. Unlike quotas, if you have perk set on a database and you create a new replica, the perk setting will not come across. And we've had a number of customers get bitten by this because they have everything set up and they have names.nsf, perk enabled, and then they add a new server to their environment. They forget to perk enable their key databases like names or admin4, and then they have issues. So it's very important to make sure that you're setting this on all of the replicas on all of your servers where you need this enabled. You also need to make sure that you're looking for missing and duplicate replicas. What we find generally for missing replicas is really common on non-mail servers. And why is that? Well, we don't have a policy that we can set to say, hey, whenever I create a new mail file, register a user and create a mail file, create the mail file on all replica servers or on all the cluster mates. That doesn't, you don't have that capability for application servers. So that's where we typically find missing replicas. And where we find duplicate replicas, usually, not always, but usually is on mail servers because the user deleted something, so they restore the mail file, they forget to change the replica ID, and then we have duplicates. So it's really important to keep an eye on those, and because we see on every single customer environment we go into for the first time, we find lots of missing replicas and we find duplicate replicas, and they're really surprised to see what we're finding. So how do you go about locating those? Well, you can look at the cluster directory database. We'll show you an example in just a minute here. You could write your own application, write an agent that goes ahead and detects those, and you could be emailed and notified when the situation happens. You could use the replication, the easy tool by Whitetria, which I'm going to also show a screen capture of, or you can use cluster symmetry. But again, there are certain limitations, right? Your templates are not going to be included. Anything that's in your data directory is not included. So just be aware of some of the limitations that you'll have to go and do some extra work yourself. So this is looking at the cluster database directory. And here I've scrolled down and I'm sorted by the replica ID, and I've found this is actually a situation where we have a duplicate replica. So it's obscure to you, but these are the same server. And so we can see here, basically, looks like someone has made a copy, maybe done a restore of the mail file. So we have the same replica ID. So that's not a good thing. Now we can see we do have a replica on both cluster mates, but we have a duplicate replica. So that's not a good situation. And here we actually have a situation where we have a double situation. Again, these are the same server. So here we have a duplicate replica, but we also have a missing replica. We don't have our secondary server listed here. So we have the double situation, double whammy, a missing replica and a duplicate replica. And here we have a situation where we just have a missing replica. There's no duplication, but there's a missing replica. So you can use CLDB-dir to find that information. We actually find when we're working with our customers that replication easy gives us the information much more quickly, much more efficiently. You don't miss things because it just pushes the information to you in a much more readable format. So you can see here, it lists all of our duplicate replicas. It's very visual, very easy to see. And we can also see which replicas are missing on our secondary server or on our primary server, as an example. We also have something called design ping pong that can happen. So here we have a situation where you have a 14.0 server, a 12.02 server, could be whatever release mix you have in your environment. And what ends up happening is we have a 14.0 server, the design task, which is set to run at 1 a.m. by default. At that time, it's going to update the design of all the mail files to the 14.0 design. And then when we replicate, that's going to replicate over, and the changes get made to your 12.02 server. And sure enough, 1 a.m. on that server, if you haven't changed to update, or design to run at a different time, it's going to update the design of your mail files to the 12.02 design. And then, of course, that replicates back to the 14.0 server, and we start the cycle again. So how do we get out of this design ping pong situation? Well, there's multiple ways we can do it. The easiest thing to do is just replicate the templates between your servers. That way, the template is over on your other servers that aren't at your most current release level, and so you're not having that design ping pong happening. So that stops that whole chain of events. The other thing you could do is you could say, I don't feel comfortable doing that. Then you can just remove design from running on the other servers that are not at the most recent version until you can get all the servers up to the same code level. So that's another way you can do it. Or you could go in and you could use selective replication and select to not replicate design elements. So multiple prongs of approach to that particular problem. So unread marks. Now we've been talking about replication. That leads right directly into unread marks. This is kind of a fun one. So are your unread marks synchronized across your replicas? Have you checked? Have you ever checked? And what we find is typically it's never been checked. Usually it only becomes an issue when there's a failover situation. It's like, well, how come I have all these documents that say they haven't read them? I read them. I filed these, I can see in my filed folders. I know I read it before I even filed it. How can my unread marks possibly be off so much? Well, it's because our unread marks aren't syncing properly. So this is a customer example. that we have. We went in and we used the Y-Trio, the Replication Easy tool, because that's the fastest, most efficient way to get the data. I can't even imagine trying to get this data otherwise. It'd be very, very, very difficult without this tool. And in this particular case, where the customer had a fairly large number of mail files, we can see only 49% of them had the unread marks in sync. 36% were out of sync, and even worse, 15%, there wasn't even an unread table on those 286 mail files. So all of the mail was considered to be unread for 15% of the mail files. So what are some of the things that you can do to make sure that this doesn't happen to you? Well, the easiest one to check first is to go to database properties and make sure you have either all servers or clustered servers only selected. We recommend all servers. It's just seems to be a better setting generally. So that's the first thing to check. And then the next thing you want to look at is when you're creating replicas, are you selecting the exchange unread marks on replication? That should be selected by default, but there are some administrators that turn it off, and then they're creating replicas, and then the unread marks are not being exchanged properly. What's also really, really key is to set this variable, the admin p exchange all unread marks equal 1. You want to set that on your source server. So whatever server you're creating the replica from, set it on that server. It does require a server restart, and then go ahead and create your replicas. And what will happen then is there's extra processing that happens, but you'll get a much better exchange of your unread marks. So those are some of the things you can do. Now, you may still have problems. And it's not, there's a slide that I'm not going to show because it's not, I don't want to go through all the detail, but you can request a hot fix from HCL if you have unread mark issues. You've tried these things and it isn't resolving them. You can actually request an unread mark hot fix, and it gives you a tool or utility you can run that will go ahead and fix the unread marks for you. So certainly something to be aware of. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Michelle to talk about overlooked necessities.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Okay, don't forget to pay attention to your console errors. Some of these should not be ignored. For example, you're seeing the first couple lines, admin4.nsf is not pushed with any server since, and it's been a long, long time, 1,681 hours on those. So, examples to look for. Other examples here, just running out of time, so I'm not going to read them all, but these are things you'd want to check. So check for console errors. There's a wealth of information in there. Don't forget about recertifying users. You're going to want to recertify them before they expire. Your server should be set to not allow expired certificates, expired IDs with expired certificates to access your server. So you're going to want to recertify those before they expire, and ideally before there is usually a 2-week period where the user is being alerted that their ID certificate is about to expire. So ideally, get to those before the user sees that. And I find there's a few ways to do this, but I like to go into the certification expiration view in the Domino directory. Take a look at which ones are either expired or expiring in a period of time. If you know there's still valid users, select them and then recertify the selected people with the action button that shows in the view. Admin4.nsf, so the admin requests database, keep it clean. And as a best practice, you don't want to make your test or development servers part of your production domain. Don't forget, keep your database small and remove those old documents. And we find with this database that 21 days is a good number. And if you want to set that, we've given you the details on how to set it through the space savers. And to avoid any issues and strange results, set all your replicas to have that same setting. And another thing, don't forget to go in here often and approve those workflow requests. When I was an administrator for the last company I worked for directly as an employee, I just had a task to do this. In the morning as I'm having my coffee, go in and approve those. These will be, perhaps deletion of mail files, I find is a big one. And if you don't have this database clean and then decide that, okay, in 2 months I'm going to finally address it, there may be requests in here to delete a mail file that should have been rejected for whatever reason. I found that if you just go blindly approve all these, sometimes you'll have an issue with a database that shouldn't have been deleted, and that's usually because no one's cleaned this up and someone's finally decided to clean this up, and now because all that time has passed, that you've created there's a problem. So to select which ones you want to approve, you can do that at a view level, and you can do it from the view shown in this screenshot, and just select the items you want and you can approve them. If you want to reject an item, you can do that too. Just open the document and put it in edit mode and you'll be able to reject it. Okay, and that's the end of our presentation, and we have 3.5 minutes for Q&A.
All right, let me just bring up the slide I have for that here. So yeah, if anybody has any questions, we have a few here. You can go to the questions pane in GoToWebinar. Depending on what layout you use, I think either way it'll be the same little questions icon, and that'll bring up the pane or floating window. So I will start with the 2 questions we have. So the first one we had was about the fault notifications, and so why might one not have the mail fault notification to field visible in the automatic server recovery section of a server document?
To not be visible? I would say potentially some corruption of that document. So I would run fixup. I'd take the server down and I'd run fixup against names.nsf, see if that fixes it. So that, to me, that's what comes to mind is if there's data that's missing, it would more than likely be that there's some corruption in the document. Do you have any other thoughts on that, Michelle?
I've not seen it not visible before, so that would be one that someone's gonna have to dig into. Nothing comes to the top of my head. Kim mentioned.
I guess the other thing you could look at if it isn't corrupted is you could open the design and maybe somebody happened to update the design of that form, and to see if maybe they put encryption on that field for some reason. So if there's been a customization to the Domino directory, you could check that. But those would be the 2 that I can think of. Otherwise, I can't imagine a reason that it wouldn't change.
Speaking of opening the design, I did just that. It's also, if you don't have automatic restart enabled, that field has a hide when saying don't show up. So that could be it too.
Okay.
You have to have automatic restart enabled.
Perfect.
So,
Yep.
So that also could be it. Next question. If I enable PIRC on a template, do child databases created with it get that setting?
No, it's perk is per database, and so that's an issue. You do have to explicitly set it at a database level. I believe there's an enhancement request for that. I don't know off the top of my head, but I know that's a request that has been asked for. To my knowledge, it has not been implemented yet.
All right, and then new one just came in. Is there any method to run the cluster repair symmetry processes with server encrypted databases?
No, not to my knowledge, unless it's added in. I don't know, unless 14 added it. I don't think it is though. If there are any databases that are encrypted, that cluster symmetry is not able to work with those. It can work with encrypted NLOs. So if you have the NLOs encrypted on an individual server, the cluster symmetry is able to basically use access to the server IDs to do whatever decryption needs to do under the covers, and it can handle an encrypted NLO situation. But for encrypted databases themselves, no, cluster symmetry is not able to help out.
All right, that's the end of our questions and the end of the webinar. So I would like to thank you both. This has actually been extremely handy. So thank you. I will go end the webinar and then go check on my servers to make sure everything's in line. And we will see everybody next month. So goodbye and thank you.
Thanks, everyone.